Australia's chief scientist has called on governments and businesses to consider creating a regulatory framework for artificial intelligence. To discuss this, I'm joined by Patrick Fair, who is a partner with Baker McKenzie. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Kat.
What do you think prompted these comments from Alan Finkel?
Look, it's a very good question. There is a very high-profile issue around using AI in weapons and warfare, and a strong push internationally to put in place some kind of global framework to stop AI arms race and stop the very likely outcome that machines will end up taking action in the battlefield without reference to any kind of human control. This is sort of argued for on an ethics basis and on a kind of where does it lead kind of basis. There's also a broader context of AI is kind of scary in that you can build a machine that doesn't forget, that can have a lot of information about your behaviours and your preferences. And there's a kind of information asymmetry emerging between the ordinary member of the public dealing with a major online provider, a major AI system, which suggests that we might need some other level of disclosure or control in order to moderate and level the playing field for ordinary commercial transactions and ordinary behaviours. So Alan Finkel's got a genuine concern, and it's certainly an area where the kinds of sort of regulatory solutions I was describing don't look like they're going to be enough or appropriate in the future.
How do you even begin to regulate something as wide-ranging and rapidly changing as artificial intelligence?
I think the answer lies in the fundamental difference between AI systems and ordinary software that we're used to licensing and controlling with traditional sort of forms of contract. There's a recognition that AI, in the stage we've got it now, which is basically a form of machine learning, has a number of weaknesses in it, and yet it's got immense potential to improve decision-making and judgment in areas where traditional software would rely strictly on some rules in order to decide, whereas AI can learn from information which is used to drive the machine learning process and produce results based on that information in a way that's not really fully understood by the user of the machine. So I suppose to answer your question, how do we come at it? Well, I think we come at it by firstly controlling the kind of information sets that's used to train the AI, and then look at some of the weaknesses in this new form of technology. There are a couple that have been well recognised. One is it's very goal-driven. So if you give it the task of optimising a particular outcome, it doesn't care about collateral damage. It focuses strictly on that outcome. By giving the machine a whole lot of data to learn from, you can end up with a decision-making process which includes the biases that are in the data, and therefore, decisions in a social context, you might adopt gender bias or you might adopt ethnic preference in terms of the outcomes of the decision. And a third one that's commonly recognised is that it learns to come up with the most likely and the average outcome rather than something which is an outlier. So it's thought that these kind of systems need to be carefully managed in terms of dealing only with cases which are within a certain range and not expecting them to be able to come up with good results when the particular case is unusual and not anticipated by the data set.
Are there particular applications of AI or principles that regulators could focus on?
I think the examples that are happening so far involve requiring a level of understanding as to how the AI is working. So you shouldn't just let it go. You need to have somebody in your organisation that understands what it's doing and how it works. Another approach is to have supervision of the outcomes, so to involve humans in looking at the decisions you're getting to check if they're right and agreeing with them. There's quite some consensus, I think, around the fact that using AI alone or a human alone is not as strong as using both, and generally there are measurable improvements in accuracy and performance by having human and AI input with the technology as it's currently developed.
How is AI currently being regulated in Australia?
It's a good question. It's hard to come up with examples of specific AI-focused rules. Perhaps the most prominent is the guideline issued by the Australian Securities and Investments Commission regarding the provision of financial advice. It's Regulatory Guide 255. And so in this case, we have financial advisors who are licensed by ASIC using machines to give advice, sometimes referred to as robo-advice. And the ASIC's guidelines say that you can't be giving this advice unless you are licensed. So the fact it's given by a machine doesn't stop it from being financial advice. Not surprising. They're saying you need to have someone in the organisation who understands the technology and understands essentially how it's working. An outcome, it needs to be checked, and there needs to be a focus and a filtering of just when it's used and making sure that it's only used for appropriate cases. There's much more to the guideline than that, but it's a great example of how to take something that's valuable and put it in a regulatory framework for a particular industry. I know others have been looking at using the same kind of technology for legal advice. It could be used in an engineering context. It's certainly being used in a medical context. And the regulatory frameworks around those professional services do accommodate the use of AI where there is a human that takes responsibility and is monitoring the outcome. So very similar sort of approach.
Thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.